My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 49 years old. I've spent the last 25 years building a modest but stable life. Nothing extravagant, just steady progress. I worked in logistics, ran operations for a regional shipping company, and was the guy who never missed a deadline, never called out sick, and never spent more than he earned. My father taught me discipline. My mother taught me humility, and I believed, perhaps naively, that love meant trust, until that trust became the very weapon used against me. I remember the day I got the call from the bank. It was a Thursday. I had just brewed my second cup of coffee and was reviewing invoices when a calm but serious voice informed me that my loan application had been approved. Confused, I asked what loan they meant. The $200,000 personal line, the woman said. Final confirmation just went through. My hand froze around the mug. I hadn't applied for any loan. I asked her to email the details. I stared at the documents for hours. My name, my social, my signature forged, but almost perfect. I didn't confront my wife, Jessica, right away. Instead, I let the silence settle. I watched her more closely. The sudden uptick in visits to her parents, the new designer handbags her mother was flaunting, the upgraded appliances in their home, the way they started hosting wine nights like they had just won the lottery. It all began to make sense. She hadn't borrowed for our future. She had taken out a debt in my name to fund their fantasy, and somehow she still kissed me goodnight, like nothing had happened. What struck me hardest wasn't the money. It was the disrespect, the entitlement, the belief that I would never notice, or worse, that I would accept it. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, not with rage, but with clarity. She had made a mistake, a deliberate one, and I realized then that my silence was going to be my greatest weapon. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something they didn't. I had time, and I had patience. I kept working. I kept smiling. I kept letting her believe the lie was safe. And every day while they spent the money I supposedly borrowed, I began documenting every move, every receipt, every bank transaction that traced back to them. I didn't change my behavior. I didn't argue. I played the role she expected, the quiet provider, the dependable fool. But behind my calm eyes, I was crafting something she'd never see coming. I wasn't looking for revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to ruin her. I wanted something quieter, something irreversible. I wanted her to watch it all unravel without ever knowing when it started. She thought she had manipulated me. What she didn't know was that the moment she signed my name on that loan, she signed the end of everything we had. I began reflecting on every moment we shared, me and Jessica. Every birthday, every quiet dinner, every late-night conversation where we promised we'd build something lasting. I remembered how she used to look at me like I was her anchor, her calm in the storm. But now I saw it differently. Maybe I had always been the anchor, but not in the way I thought. Not someone to hold her steady, but someone she had tied her ambitions to, dragging me wherever her parents' greed led. Jessica came from a family that looked wealthy, but behind the gloss was debt, desperation, and pride, dressed up in luxury. Her father had a failed business he never recovered from, and her mother clung to appearances like oxygen. I used to feel sorry for them, until I realized they weren't just needy. They were entitled. They believed their lifestyle should be maintained, even if it meant stealing from the only person who never asked for anything in return. I replayed the signs I had missed. The sudden secrecy with her phone, the way she avoided conversations about money, the casual dismissal whenever I asked about our savings. "Don't worry," she'd say. "Everything's fine." And I wanted to believe it. I did believe it, because I loved her, but love should never be blind. Love should never make you overlook betrayal that's unfolding in plain sight. Some nights, I'd sit in the car outside my house for an hour after work, just breathing, just preparing myself to go inside, to be normal, to hide the storm in my chest. I didn't want to explode. I didn't want to make a scene. I wanted control. I wanted every move to be deliberate, because if I gave in to emotion, I'd be the fool she painted me as. But if I stayed calm, I could rebuild smarter and stronger. I withdrew emotionally, but not physically. She never suspected a thing. I still brought her morning coffee, still asked about her day, and she kept lying, thinking I was too dull, too slow, too loyal to catch on. Her parents even started dropping hints that I should consider selling the second property to help them out more. That's when I knew they were all in on it. It wasn't a slip-up. It was a strategy, and they thought they'd gotten away with it. But what none of them realized was this. I had resources they didn't know about. A second account, a trusted friend in corporate finance, and a memory like stone. Every insult, every deception, every forged signature, I stored them like arrows, each one ready. I wasn't just hurt. I was learning, and quietly, I was setting the stage for something they could never undo. I started with the bank. Not to confront, but to learn. I requested the full loan file, reviewed every line, every forged document, every email sent in my name. They had gone to great lengths to impersonate me, down to a fake call from a burner number confirming the loan. But they'd made one mistake, using my primary account as collateral, that gave me leverage, that made it mine to reclaim and theirs to answer for. A friend of mine, Monica, worked in legal compliance for a private wealth firm. I didn't give her the whole story, just enough. She helped me quietly place holds on certain transactions, flag suspicious activity, and file inquiries that would remain invisible until the right moment. She even pointed me to a forensic accountant, someone who could follow the trail without setting off alarms. Within 2 weeks, I had everything: a map of where the money had gone, whose hands it passed through, and how they were laundering it through property improvements, cars and family business expenses. That second property they'd suggested I sell, it was still in my name. Jessica had no idea that I had already moved the deed into a blind trust months before the loan. I did it originally as a retirement measure. Now it became my shield. While they paraded around in new clothes and renovated kitchens, believing I'd soon cash out to support them, I was securing the walls they would never break through again. I went to the bank and froze the account tied to the loan. Not closed, just paused. A pending investigation. That alone sent ripples through their spending. Suddenly, purchases declined. Scheduled payments bounced. Jessica looked rattled, but played it off, blaming the system. I simply nodded, as if I was as confused as she was. I wasn't confused. I was watching the cracks form in her carefully constructed lies. I started working longer hours. At least that's what I told her. In truth, I was visiting lawyers, reviewing options, creating contingencies. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was trying to reclaim myself. That meant controlling the narrative, ensuring that when the truth came out, it wasn't loud. It was final. No arguments. No dramatic confrontations, just a chain of consequences that unfolded like clockwork. The night before everything began to shift, I stood in our kitchen while she chatted on the phone with her mother about a weekend spa trip. She was laughing, carefree, unaware that I had already filed the fraud report that morning. I watched her, not with hatred, but with a kind of mourning. She had chosen this path. She'd gambled with someone who always played the long game, and now I was done playing fair. The first domino fell quietly, a call from the bank to Jessica, informing her that the loan account had been flagged and temporarily frozen due to a fraud investigation. I wasn't home when it happened, but I found her pacing the living room when I returned, her face pale, her words clipped. "There's some kind of mix-up," she muttered. "They're saying something about irregularities." I played dumb. I asked if she needed help. She shook her head, too proud, too certain she still had control. The next blow came when her parents' credit cards were declined at their favorite restaurant. I later confirmed that the funds used to open those lines had been traced back to the loan disbursement. One by one, their luxuries turned into liabilities. They tried calling their contacts, trying to pull strings, but I had been methodical. The web I'd built was tight. Every financial branch they tried to lean on had already been warned quietly, professionally. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as I'd designed. Jessica's confusion turned to panic. She began staying up late at night, digging through statements, whispering frantically on the phone. I pretended not to notice. I still greeted her in the morning with coffee, still asked how she slept. The weight of her silence was growing heavier by the day. I could see it in the way her smile faltered, how her hands trembled over the laptop. She was beginning to realize that this wasn't going away, and yet she never admitted anything, not one word. She tried to call in favors, even from my contacts, but they no longer answered, because I had spoken first. I had told them the truth, calmly, factually, that someone I trusted had misused my identity, drained my name of integrity, and betrayed my faith, and they listened. Not because I shouted, but because I showed them the paper trail. I didn't have to convince anyone. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Then came the letter. An official notice from my lawyer, delivered to the house while she was in the shower. I left it on the table for her. When she emerged and saw it, her hands hovered above the envelope like it burned. She didn't open it while I was there. She waited until I had left for work. But when I returned, she couldn't even meet my eyes. She had read it. She knew what it meant. I wasn't just walking away. I was reclaiming everything, legally, quietly, irrevocably. Her parents called that night, their tone no longer smug, but desperate. They demanded to speak with me, accused me of sabotage. I let the call ring out. I owed them no explanation. They gambled on my silence, mistook kindness for weakness, but now the silence was theirs, and every echo of it reminded them that the man they took for granted had never truly been theirs to use. It was strange how fast their world crumbled once the truth had no reason to hide. Within 2 weeks, Jessica's parents were served with legal notices for the unpaid funds they had misappropriated. The forensic accountant had traced everything, every transaction, every invoice paid with stolen money. The government got involved next. Fraud is one thing. Laundering someone else's identity into a personal luxury fund, that's another. They had turned my name into a crime scene, and now they were the ones being investigated. Jessica's mask cracked slowly. She stopped dressing up. Her voice grew soft, like a child waiting for punishment. I didn't give her that satisfaction. No lectures, no breakdowns, just distance. I moved my things into the guest room. The silence between us became the loudest sound in the house. She tried small talk, then apologies disguised as casual comments. "I didn't know it would get this bad," she whispered once. I looked at her, not with rage, but with clarity, and simply said, "You knew enough." One afternoon, I found her sitting in the living room, clutching a photo of us from our wedding. Her hands trembled. She looked up at me like she was drowning, but I didn't throw her a rope. She had built this flood herself. I remember thinking how tragic it was, not just the betrayal, but the fact that she thought love could be stolen and spent like money, that trust was something you could forge like a signature and expect it to hold. The divorce papers were served quietly. No courtroom drama, no raised voices. Everything was documented, clean, decisive. I gave her a choice: take the modest settlement, walk away, or push this into public scandal and face full exposure. She signed without argument. That day, as she handed the documents back, she looked at me and whispered, "I didn't think you had this in you," and I nodded. That's what you were counting on. Her parents? They sold off half their possessions just to hire legal defense. Their reputations, once paraded at charity events and wine tastings, were reduced to whispers and closed doors. No one wanted to be associated with fraud. Their friends disappeared like smoke. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just watched the same silence they had once forced on me return to claim them. And in the stillness of it all, I felt something strange. Peace. Not because they suffered, but because I hadn't let them define my story. I had rewritten it without vengeance, without venom, just precision, just truth. The same truth they tried so hard to bury under debt and designer clothes. I had taken it back, and that, in the end, was justice. After the dust settled, I took a long walk through the old neighborhood where Jessica and I had first lived. Small apartment, noisy street, leaky faucets, but honest days. Back then, we had dreams that weren't tied to appearances or image. We used to talk about owning a cabin one day, away from the city. It was never about wealth. It was about peace. But somewhere along the way, she traded that peace for prestige. And in doing so, she lost the very foundation that gave her stability. I didn't feel hate in those moments. I felt distance, like I was walking through the memory of a life I once thought was mine. But now it was just a chapter I had finally closed. My name had been restored. The loan was voided after the investigation. Charges were filed, and while I didn't attend the hearings, I read the transcripts. Jessica didn't fight. She barely spoke. Maybe she had realized too late that once trust is gone, silence becomes the final sentence. Friends asked why I didn't take her to court for everything, why I didn't press charges personally. But the truth is, I didn't need more punishment. What I needed was distance. I had watched her lose everything. Not through rage, but through her own choices. The real consequence wasn't legal, it was emotional. She had gambled away the one person who would have stood beside her no matter what, and all for a taste of a life that didn't even belong to her. I moved out of the city, bought a small house near the water with the funds I had protected. Quiet, serene, nothing fancy, just mine. I started running in the mornings again, something I hadn't done in years. The air felt cleaner, or maybe it was just that my mind was finally free. I slept with the windows open, without fear, without secrets beside me in the dark. People think revenge has to be loud, explosive, but I learned that real power moves in silence. It's in the moment you walk away without needing to be heard. It's in the calm you carry when others expect chaos. Jessica expected me to scream. Her parents expected me to plead. Instead, I rebuilt, silently, strategically, and completely. And when I look back now, I don't feel broken. I feel whole, because I never became what they were. I never stooped to their game. I rose above it, and that is a victory they'll never understand. Jessica sent a letter 6 months later, no return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. I sat with it unopened for days. Finally, I read it. It was a strange mix of apology and nostalgia, memories she missed, moments she regretted, and a faint attempt to say she didn't know how deep the damage would go. But what struck me most wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. She never once admitted that it was wrong, only that it got out of hand. I didn't write back, not because I hated her, but because I no longer owed her closure. That's the thing about betrayal. It creates a debt that apology can't repay. Only time and distance and self-respect can. I took that letter, folded it once, and placed it in a box with all the documents I had gathered during those months. It wasn't for vengeance. It was a reminder to myself, a reminder of what happens when you ignore the erosion of your own boundaries. Her parents eventually downsized. Word got around that they sold their home below market value. The legal fees had gutted them. Their faces, once so full of disdain when I walked into their kitchen, now rarely appeared in public. They weren't ruined, but they were humbled, and somehow, I think that hurt more. People like them thrive on appearances. Take that away, and you've taken everything. Meanwhile, I was thriving in obscurity. No one knew my story unless I chose to tell it. I started consulting part-time, quiet work that didn't demand too much, but kept me sharp, and I found joy in simple things. Restoring old furniture, hiking, cooking meals without conversation layered in lies. Peace isn't loud. It's not performative. It's waking up and knowing your world is built on truth. I think people underestimate the power of quiet exits. We're taught to fight fire with fire, but sometimes the most devastating response is to walk away with your dignity intact, letting their own choices be the fire that burns the house down. Jessica didn't just lose a husband. She lost the man who would have carried her through any storm. And the saddest part, I don't think she ever really saw me until I was already gone. I saw myself, though. Finally, fully, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fading in someone else's shadow. I was whole, alone, but never lonely. Strong, still, unshaken. There's something sacred about starting over when no one's watching. No applause, no validation. Just the quiet decision to rise again. That's what my life became after Jessica, an exercise in rediscovery. I didn't chase distractions. I chased presence. I learned to sit with myself in silence and not feel hollow. And in that silence, I met a version of me I hadn't seen in decades. Steady, perceptive, no longer tethered to someone else's chaos. I spent weekends at the local library, reading old architecture books, sketching ideas, not because I wanted to build something monumental, but because it reminded me I still had imagination. I took long drives with no destination. Let the miles unravel the memories. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering what Jessica was doing. Her world had shrunk, mine was expanding. Slowly, intentionally. One day, while walking through a local farmer's market, I bumped into an old college friend, Lena. We hadn't spoken in years. She asked what I'd been up to. I gave her a smile and said, rebuilding. She didn't press for details, just nodded and said, sometimes the best homes are built after the first one burns down. We had coffee that afternoon, no expectations, just honest conversation. I realized then that I was no longer carrying the past. I was walking freely through the present. Lena and I became friends again, real friends, no masks, no performance, just mutual respect. And in that simplicity, I found something I had forgotten, connection without condition. She knew nothing about the betrayal, and I didn't feel the need to explain it. I wasn't hiding it. I was simply done letting it define me. Eventually, I shared my story not for sympathy, but as a way of closing the book for good. She listened without flinching, without judging. And when I was done, she simply said, "You handled it like a man who knows his worth." That sentence stayed with me, because for years, I didn't know mine. I was just a provider, a shadow of a husband, a convenient name on a loan. Now I was something more, someone whole. I didn't need Jessica's apology. I didn't need anyone's validation. I had something better, clarity. I knew who I was, what I'd endured, what I'd protected, and most importantly, what I'd reclaimed. That was the real win. Not revenge, but rebirth. It's strange how peace doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly, like sunlight on a cold floor. One morning, I realized I hadn't thought about Jessica for weeks. Not with anger, not with grief. Just not at all. Her name no longer tightened my chest. Her parents no longer lived rent-free in my mind. The storm had passed, and in its place was calm so profound, it almost felt undeserved. But I had earned it, every inch of it. With every decision to stay silent when I could have exploded. With every calculated move that chose restoration over retaliation. My world wasn't just repaired, it was transformed. I hadn't gone back to who I was before. I had become someone new, someone stronger. Someone whose peace couldn't be purchased or stolen or forged. The news eventually trickled in. Jessica's parents sold their remaining assets and relocated out of state. Jessica moved in with a cousin temporarily, then disappeared from the radar. I never bothered to follow up. Some stories don't need sequels, they just need to end. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. I just exhaled, knowing I wasn't tethered to it anymore. That winter, I rented a small cabin in the mountains. No phone signal, no obligations. Just snow, firewood, and silence. I sat there one evening, listening to the wind howl outside, and I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I had survived without turning bitter, because I had walked through betrayal and come out clean on the other side. That kind of peace. You can't manufacture it, you earn it. People often ask what I would say to her if I saw her again. I used to imagine that moment, a speech, a cold stare, a line that would leave her stunned, but now I'd say nothing. I'd just keep walking. Because some battles aren't worth reopening, and some victories are too sacred to tarnish with words. There's power in that kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need to scream. The kind that says, you no longer live here, not in my house, not in my mind, not in my heart. That's peace, that's freedom. And that's what I built for myself. This is not a revenge story. Not really. It's a story of return. Of coming back to yourself after someone else tried to erase you. Of remembering your worth. Even when others tried to write your value in stolen ink. Jessica didn't just take money. She took time, trust, and the belief that I was safe in my own home. But what she didn't know is that the soul she tried to steal was always quietly watching, quietly waiting, quietly planning its return. I often think about the version of me that let things slide, the one who didn't ask questions, who gave benefit after benefit of the doubt, that man wasn't weak, he was loyal, and loyalty when given to the wrong people becomes your own undoing. I had to learn that. And I did, not through bitterness, but through fire. Quiet, steady fire. Today I wake up without alarms, without pretense. My home is mine, my peace is earned. And if I love again, and I will, it won't be out of fear of being alone. It will be out of fullness. Out of knowing that I have rebuilt what they tried to ruin, and that I did it without losing myself in the process. To anyone listening to this, if you've ever been betrayed, used, or forgotten, remember this: you do not have to explode to make an impact. You do not have to fight loud to win. Sometimes the strongest move is to walk away with your soul intact and let silence do the rest. My story didn't end with her betrayal. It began with my return to peace, to power, to purpose. That's the kind of ending that doesn't need applause, just a quiet nod. And that is more than enough. The end.